Welcome to the Brigham Young University Family History Library webinar series. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Braden Knudsen and I'll be your host for this webinar. We'd like to ask you to answer a couple of our polls that we have down at the bottom of the screen as we go through some of our announcements and introduction. Our next webinar will be tomorrow, Friday, April 14th at 4 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. And that will be on digging deeper into Google for genealogists, and James Tanner will be returning again for us tomorrow. So we hope you can come back and participate in that webinar with us. Come with questions, and we'll try to help you out a little bit more. If you have any suggestions for future webinar topics, you can always email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu, and feedback is always appreciated. Today we'll be pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation titled Researching in a Library or Archive. James Tanner has a bachelor's degree in Spanish and a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Utah. He received a Juris Doctor degree in law at Arizona State University. He served for 2 years as an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army and 39 years as an Arizona trial attorney. He has previously owned a retail computer business and an Apple Macintosh software company. James has over 35 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy Star blog and Rejoice and Be Exceeding Glad. He served for 10 years as a missionary at the Mesa, Arizona Family Search Library and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. He has presented at expos and conferences around the U.S. and Canada. James has 7 children and 33 grandchildren. Okay, as we get this loaded up, remind you about our comments box in the upper right-hand corner, and any questions that you have during the presentation can be submitted in the lower right-hand corner, and we'll make sure that all of those get answered by the end of the presentation. And we will turn the time over to James.
Howdy, this is James Tanner. We're here with a webinar from the BYU Family History Library in Provo, Utah. And coincidentally, this is National Library Week, the week in which this particular presentation is being recorded. So that was kind of an interesting coincidence. We're going to be talk about researching in libraries or archives. And we'll get going here. And a little quote here from Marcus Tullius Cicero, just in case you hadn't heard this one. If you have a garden and a library, you have everything you need. And I would almost be able to go along with that. I'd need Costco and Walmart, however, on top of that. But okay. So we're going to move on here. Most library catalogs are now online. Now that's good and that's bad. Some of us who are in our dottering older years can remember the days of 3x5 cards in huge drawers and stacks and boxes that are all brown and nice wood stuff, you know. And how interesting it was to thumb through all of those card catalogs. Well, there are good things about card catalogs and there's bad things about card catalogs, but most of the library catalogs online are unfortunately just simply copies of what they had in their card catalog in the paper card catalogs that they had. And so you really need to know quite a bit about libraries and the cataloging system in order to find anything. It's interesting being here at Brigham Young University in a very large library. The Family History Library is part of the Harold B. Lee Library, which is the main library on the campus here in Provo. And it has about 4.5 million books and about 8 million total articles of other things and such and around. It's rather large. It's spread out. I think it has something close to like almost 100 miles of shelves or something like that. But I mean, it's a rather imposing structure. But in talking to the library staff here, it's been interesting because we're in an academics cycle here at the library. That means every year we change. We have new classes that come in. We have people who graduate. We have the professors, come and go, things like that. So there's always some kind of change going on in the library. But one of the things that's most marked changed is the beginning of each school year in September, when traditionally most of the students come to the school for the first time. And they suddenly find out that they're supposed to do something in this thing called the library, and we are very, very well acquainted with the fact that some of them have never been inside a library of this size before in their lives. So they have absolutely no idea what to do or where to go. So some of us, of course, are going to be in the same situation because we're going to be dealing with libraries all around the world. And so we don't physically or whatever know what's inside of those libraries. We don't know how they're structured or whatever. And that's part of this process of doing research in libraries and archives. Um, one of the one of the questions that comes up continually is how much of the world's knowledge has already been digitized, and particularly that portion of the world's knowledge that deals with genealogically significant records. And the answer to that is pretty hard to say. Um, but I am aware of so many more records that are not digitized that I can hardly believe that we've made much of a dent in the huge number of records that are available worldwide yet. So I would guess that we're still a little ways behind the ball here before we get to a point where we can rely completely on digitized material. In fact, we probably never will. I'm guessing that there are items in libraries that will probably never get, let's say never is a long time, but it'd probably be many, many, many years before any of these items are digitized. And now, even if they are digitized, that does not mean that they're available because there's kind of two sets here. So let me kind of start out by saying that genealogy is not a unified subject. It is a subject that borrows from all sorts of different topics and categories. We may be at one minute looking at U.S. government documents in the form of census records or military records, and the other few minutes later we might be looking at church records, and we may be looking in one part of the world, if we're just doing this United States, we might be looking in New England, and then in the South or in the West Coast or wherever. And basically the cataloging structure of major libraries is um, really quite diverse when it starts to come to trying to deal with a subject like that. And so what happens is that you get genealogical information in different sections of a library. Now, how did I learn about this? Well, years ago, I put myself through undergraduate and graduate school working at the University of Utah Library, our sports rival to the north here from BYU. And I spent a number of years working there as a bibliographer. And a bibliographer is a person who checks books orders and verifies the existence of a book. So if a professor wanted to purchase a book for the university for his use or the school's use or whatever, then he would send an order for a book down to the library, and we would have to do two things. One is verify whether or not the item was in the library in the first place, and the second one was to determine exactly how the item was titled. What's the citation for the item that will get the item from someone who actually sold the item? So we're working through a process where literally we were being given a stack of cards of, say, 100 cards at a time, which was kind of the average, what we'd run with. And out of those 100 cards, we would have to look up everything in all the different reference books and all the different places in the library that we could find, see if we could find that particular item. Some of them were ridiculously easy, and some of them were in our hardcore pile that we would work on whenever there weren't enough other cards to go around. And those would be almost indecipherable or impossible. And my job was to do these in all of the Western European languages and Hebrew. So I was doing research in all of those different languages and in Hebrew fairly consistently for about 5 years. Well, then I became the reference librarian at the Arizona State University Law School for the 3 years that I was in law school. So I spent quite a bit of time then in libraries, but since then I practically lived in libraries. So and particularly during the last 15 years that I've spent volunteering as a missionary in Mesa Family Search Library and in the BYU Family History Library. So what I've learned is this. The simple thing that I've learned is that different sections of the library can have exactly the same thing, physical different sections of the library. Why is that? Because the people who do the cataloging catalog based on what they feel that particular item that comes in how it should be cataloged. And that cataloging process is essentially arbitrary. So there's nothing uniform or anything about that. The same item can be cataloged 5 different ways by 5 different catalogers. And so basically, items that are exactly the same end up in different parts of the library. And so what we end up doing in libraries primarily, and those of us who have lived here for years realize, is we do something that's called reading the shelves. And when we talk about reading the shelves, what we mean is we go to a general part of the library where we identify at least one item that we're interested in, and then we start looking through the shelves, item by item, pulling them off the shelf and looking at them for relevancy. And as we go through that process, we basically have a more, let's say, we're more assured that we are going to find the information that is there if it is there. And that's how we find it. And ultimately, we do not rely on the catalogs except to give us an initial, what you might call leg up or hand up to a place to start looking. But we do the actual searching right in the stacks, looking at the stacks. Now, that helps because that's if you're physically present in the library. Now, how do you do that if you're not physically present in the library? And that's really the question that we have to answer. It's very frequently that someone will come into the library and say, cannot find anything on this subject, and one of the librarians will simply look at it, walk over, and hand them the book, because it is something that you have to become skilled at. It is not something that you're born knowing how to find things in a large library. Okay, so let's look at library organization, because that's kind of at the basis of being able to do research. And here, what we're trying to do here is understand. The first thing I'm trying to convey is that libraries and archives are extremely valuable places to do research for genealogy. There are hundreds, thousands of libraries across the United States, from small public libraries in small towns to the vast libraries like the Library of Congress and some of the other huge libraries that are across the country. New York Public Library, Michigan State Library, Michigan State University Library, Harvard University Library. These libraries that are so large that no one even knows what's there, literally. And I was sitting listening to an interview on. This has been a couple of years ago that I was listening to an interview with the librarian of the Harvard University Library, the big library at Harvard. And the question that was one of the first questions that they asked him was, isn't it true that most of the things in the library have been digitized? And the librarian who there said, I really can't say that would be true. He said, for example, and this was a couple of years ago, but probably conditions haven't changed significantly. He said, the Harvard University Library has over 1 million manuscripts which have yet to be cataloged or even looked at, sitting there. Okay, so there's sort of the idea of how some of this works, and that how the kinds of things and the efforts you have to go through to get some information. Let me give you one more example, and that's the National Archives, the United States of America, Washington, D.C., and all over, spread around the country in the branch National Archive offices. Okay, well, the National Archives catalogs their items by agency. So they are basically putting things in the order of Department of Agriculture, Department of Transportation, military, whatever, Congress, whatever records they're put into those categories. And then within those categories, the records are simply cataloged as to a general title and then measured in terms of cubic feet. So basically, if you were to do research, for instance, in well, I started with the agricultural department, but it wouldn't matter which one. If you were going to do research in the agriculture department, they would tell you what was there in the sense of saying agricultural documents between this point in time and this point in time. And then they would say consisting of 32 cubic feet. And then that was it. So if you're doing research, basically you would have to sit there and try and figure out what you wanted and whether or not it was somewhere in that pile of 32 cubic feet of documents. Now that's the extreme, but I need to mention that because that is the reality of dealing with these libraries. Okay, first of all, we have a basic class system for library organization called the Dewey Decimal System. The Dewey Decimal System, everybody but kind of familiar with that name. They probably talked to you about it in high school when you were taken into a library to do your research in the library in your high school. Second big one out there is called the Library of Congress Classification, LCC. And the Library of Congress classification is, there are two different ways that the Library of Congress does their books. First of all, they have a huge classification and subclassification system. It's if you were printed out, it would be probably hundreds and hundreds of pages of simply listing of categories of things that they can put in the library. And then once they're classified, then they're assigned an LC number, a Library of Congress number, and an LC number is an accession number. An accession number means number one, the first item received is number one, the second item received is number two, and so forth. And actually, this is one of the more efficient ways, especially if you have access to computers. This is obviously a very efficient way to catalog things. But that's where we are. And then the third one is called the colon, just like colon, except in Cologne, it's actually a Spanish word, classification system, and that's called the CC system. And then there's another one called the Universal Decimal Classification, or UDC. Okay, so there are these four different major ways of classifying information in a library. Interestingly enough, some libraries use part of one and part of another and kind of pick and choose the way that they're going to classify everything in their library. In fact, some sections of the library may be under the Library of Congress classification system, and some parts may be under the Dewey Decimal System or a modified version of both. So what you end up with is an almost unique classification system for each library. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the Dewey Decimal System. It was first published back in 1876 by Melville Dewey. That's why it's called the Dewey Decimal System. And revised and expanded through 23 major editions. And the new books can be added to the library in their appropriate location based on a subject. And it's used by about 200,000 libraries in at least 135 countries. So you're pretty likely to run into the Dewey Decimal System, particularly in smaller libraries and in public libraries and things like that. It's because people, because it is a rather well-known way of classifying things, then people get used to looking for mysteries where they want mysteries and how-to books and where they want their how-to books and science fiction in another section and whatever. So that helps people to become oriented and feel comfortable in using the libraries. The main difference between the larger archives and the larger libraries and say a local public library is the larger archives and bigger libraries are not necessarily too awfully worried about their patrons and how much effort they have to go through to find the stuff. They're more interested in keeping track of it themselves. and trying to maintain the integrity of the collection. Okay, so they're basically kind of a different situation. Now, these are the general Dewey Decimal Classification, and you'll recognize some of these. And the social sciences, 300, is generally one where you'll find books that are about genealogy. But see, here's what's going to happen. See, you'll find books under the 900 series on history and geography because that's where they will put the personal and county and state histories and anything they can't figure out what to do with. And then they'll further separate those out by geographic area. So if a record doesn't fit, very well in one geographic area, it's very possible that they make an arbitrary decision as to where to put it. And in addition to that, we can have the books in the language department. We could have even technology books. If you start talking about computers and genealogy, then that book may end up in the technology department, and so forth and so on. In other words, each one of these areas may very well end up. And recently, for example, I found a book classified as a religion book that was basically the church records, because it was church records from a church in New England in the early 1700s. They stuck it in the religion section. So you never know. And this is kind of the point of this discussion, is to give you some ideas about how this all works and how you can become acquainted with it. These are the classifications for the genealogically related section. Basically, if it's identified as a genealogy work, then it will show up under one of these numbers. But you'll notice church history is 28X, and bibliographies are 016X. The X is a number, whatever number they've assigned to it. And you'll notice that Europe is under 94X, whereas family histories are 929s and Civil War is 973. So you're really looking at jumping all over the library physically, depending on how they've arranged their physical locations. You can't just simply go to one section and look and decide that you've looked at all the other records that you need to. Okay, what about the Library of Congress classification system? It was invented by a person named Herbert Putnam in 1897. Now these are not things that they made up when we had computers or when it was the technology. And that's what I'm saying, is that the technology has basically, from the library standpoint, is simply mirrored. It's not reverse mirrored, but it's actually created a way of modeling what was in the original library itself and the way it's physically located. So it's helpful to know that you're still going to be faced with this issue of discovering information in a variety of locations. And now the LC, or Library of Congress classification system, was designed specifically for the purposes and collection of the Library of Congress. By the way, the Library of Congress goes by the acronym LOC. So when you ever hear somebody say LOC, they mean the Library of Congress. So I got that at the LOC kind of thing. Okay. And it was to replace a fixed location system developed by Thomas Jefferson. It is not the Library of Congress control numbers, LCCN, assigned to all books and authors. That's the LC number that I talked about a moment ago. That's the accession number. So what's the reality here? Well, there are two general categories of libraries. We call them circulating and non-circulating libraries. Non-circulating libraries are reference libraries, and they're just that. The items in the library do not leave the library, except for the people who actually live or work there, generally speaking. But the public does not go in and check out a book and take it home or take it out of the library. Any research that you do has to be done within the library itself. Circulating libraries, on the other hand, are like your public library where you go in, find a book, go up to have a library card, check the book out, and bring it back or pay a fine if you don't. Um, Now, that's been changed slightly because now we have libraries online that are functioning completely online. And we'll get to that in just a minute. Okay, the next one is the Library of Congress classification system. And here's the numbers. We're not going to go into this, but you can see that if you look at these topics, you'll see that genealogy could be spread over half a dozen or 8 or 10 of these different areas. So it's not going to be anything convenient for genealogical researchers to go into a library and expect to find all the books that are relevant to the subject of looking for your ancestor in wherever that ancestor happened to come from. Okay, so let's the Cologne classification system. I don't think you're going to have to worry about it because it's used primarily in India. Now, if you do have Indian ancestors, uh, Indian ancestors, then you may end up working with this, but it's not likely that you will. It's mostly developed for, and it's more recent than the other ones. It's developed in 1933. Okay, and then the Universal Decimal Classification System is a by Belgian bibliographers at the end of the 19th century, and it's been published and translated into various 40 different languages. It's used in about 150,000 libraries in 130 different countries. So you really have to determine at the basis of which of these systems you're working with when you go to the library. And like I mentioned a moment ago, if you're working online, then you have to you still have to make these inquiries because your search in their search engine, that their catalog or whatever, may be influenced by their classification system. And obviously, if you want to locate the item physically in the library, you're going to have to be able to work your way through their classification system so that you can look. Now, what part of this has been replaced by the what we call string search? Now, ideally, for example, with the millions of books that have now been digitized and are online, you can search every word in every book. So you could keep looking for your surnames, and you could look for places, you could look for keywords. Anything you wanted to look for, you would start searching through those various items. But what we're talking about here is primarily focusing on those libraries where the information is still sitting on paper on the shelves in their little containers, and you'll need to understand how to get to that paper. I'm really kind of, it's over the years, people have said to me, very common for people to say to me things like this, and start talking and say, well, I've been working on this project for a long time with finding my great 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 grandfather and where he lived, and we've looked everywhere. And one of the comments I always had back to that, I have quite a few, but the one that applies here is that I would say, oh, that's interesting. How did you like the New York Public Library? And they go, well, what do you mean? I've never been to the New York Public Library. I said, oh, a moment ago you just said you'd searched everywhere. And of course, we all know that the New York Public Library is one of the largest genealogical repositories in the world for valuable information. So I just assumed you'd been there, you know. Well, anyway, that's kind of a not too kind and kind of flippant way of illustrating the fact that genealogical searches really do, in a lot of cases, involve looking in lots and lots of different libraries. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But we need to carefully study these catalogs before we go to the library so we know what we're looking for. The worst case scenario is, and I can tell this, I won't identify the library as such, but I was helping a patron in a library, And the patron went to the help desk, or the, what you'd call the reference desk in the library, and asked for the location of a book. And the help desk said, "Oh no, we don't have that book." They looked on their catalog, online catalog, and said, "No, no, we don't have that in the library." And then the patron came back to me and said, "Well, you told me to look for this book, and I just went up there and asked the reference people, and they said it's not there." And I said, "Oh, really? I know it is here." Okay, so we uh, started walking around the library, and I said, "I think if we go over in this area that we might be able to find that book." And as we went over there, I said, I saw one of my uh, people that I knew in the library, and I happen to know a few people in this library, and I said, "Oh, hey, you know where these books are?" And she said, "Oh yeah, they're on the reference shelf over there. You go over around that corner and up the reference shelf." So we went over, and there they were. There were the books that she'd just been told were not in the library because someone looked online. And that's the danger that you're falling into when you start looking for material about your ancestors, is that you'll search and you'll think that you're not producing any information out of your searches, and then you'll start to believe that the information is not there. And the answer that I always give, and the common statement that I make in this situation, is always the same, and that is, you always proceed as if you knew that it was there. Even if you can't find it immediately, you know it's there, and so you keep looking because you know you're going to find it. Okay, and that's the same procedure and philosophy that I would use in approaching a library, online library catalog. It's very important that you outline specific research objectives before you go to the library. We have so many people. By the way, this is an interesting phenomena here. It's not just common. Not this library. It's every library. Today, with the computers and with genealogists, what we see is, we'll see in this library, we're surrounded by books. Everywhere you look, there are stacks of hundreds and thousands of books. But during my time here in the BYU library, now we're going on a little more than 3 years here. The During that period of time, I think I've seen less than a half a dozen people actually use any books. And I made that comment to all of the volunteer missionaries here at the library, and about a week or two later, somebody came up to me and said, "Come here, come here." And I said, "Okay." And they said, "Look, that lady's got a pile of books. She's looking at books." And I went, "Oh, thanks. That helps." But the idea here is that you're sitting in the. It's just like sitting in the middle of, you're dying of thirst, and you're on an island in the middle of a freshwater lake where you could drink any of the water without any problem. And you're just ignoring that because you're trying to get water out of this little sun uh, baking distilling thing that you've got called a computer, that's kind of trying to suck the information out of the air rather than use all of the information that's sitting there right around you all the time. So this is kind of the information problem. So when you do go to the libraries, be prepared. Be prepared with computers, phones, cameras, paper, pencil, etc. When you're coming to a library like this, you certainly want to have some way to record your information, and that is usually in the form of an SD card or a flash drive or some kind of mechanism that can interface with the computers and the storage devices that are here. The days, and by the way, this is a point where I need to make the point, is that one thing you certainly do have to know before, especially if you're going to travel any distance to a library, you really have to know what their ground rules are, what it is that they're going to allow you to do, what they're not going to allow you to do. I mean, some libraries, we went into a university library. This was Northern Arizona University Library in Flagstaff, Arizona, and to do some research about one of my great grandfathers. And I had done the research online, and I knew that they had the records that I was looking for. And I went up to the counter, and they happened to be in the part of the library called the Special Collections. And this is a part of the library that's non-circulating. In other words, you have to read there, look at the documents there. And so I said, by the way, do you have any of the records here that are written by George S. Tanner on the Tanner Papers collection that would contain information on Henry Tanner in Joseph City, Arizona? And they said, no. Looked at it, the catalog, went through the online catalog, said, no, no, don't have it. I said, well, yeah, you do have it. And then I started talking to them, and they said, and they looked further, and they went, oh yeah, we do have it. It's 6 linear feet. How would you like it? And I said, well, he said, well, I mean, what do you mean? And he said, well, do you want us to bring it out one box at a time, or would you like it all at once? I said, well, why don't I just get it all at once? And he said, fine. I said, well, how can I copy it? And he said, well, yeah. And I said, well, how much are photocopies? He said, 75 cents a piece. I said, sorry, no, I'm not going to do that. I may need a couple of hundred pages. And I said, can I bring in my scanner? He said, no, no scanners allowed. So I said, well, what about my camera? Can I bring in a camera and take pictures of the pages? And he said, oh, yeah, sure, we don't care. And so so I brought my camera in. Now, since that time, and this has been a long time ago, and I was very well familiar with the process. But now I basically, if I go into a library, I carry my camera. Of course, I make sure that I have permission from the library rules that I've looked and researched, that I have a permission to actually carry a camera into the library and use it, and to take pictures of the pages that I'm going to go look at. But it still it makes me feel really interested to see researchers sitting there with a pad of paper, copying stuff out of books and copying things off of microfilms and copying things off of all the different media items, because I don't do that anymore. I basically I have my phone, which is a camera, and mine happens to be an iPhone. And I just take out my iPhone, I click, I take a picture of the item. I have a program out there called Google Photos, which I have unlimited photo storage for free on Google. And so those pictures that I take are automatically uploaded to Google. So by the time I get home, I go to my Google Photos, and then I can download onto my computer all of those documents that I just took pictures of. Okay, so it just saved me hours and hours of work to take the pictures that I've taken in the library. Now, once again, repeating, you can't do this everywhere. You have to be careful of what you're doing, because you may be violating some rule or regulation of the library. That's particularly true of closed stack libraries like the Library of Congress and the National Archives and other the larger institutions like that. So carefully observe all the restrictions, because you don't want to be kicked out or ushered out of the library, or even have a fine or being arrested. Okay, so here's the research in 3 steps. First of all, find a book or other item related to the subject, walk to the shelves, examine every book or item for content. And if you think, well, you really are kind of off whatever it is you're thinking about, Tanner, you don't know anything. Well, anything. Let me tell you, if you talk to people who have been doing research all their lives in libraries, like I have, and like many of my cohorts have, this is common. This is the way that it's done. We basically start at A and go all the way through Z. I did this not too long ago here in the library. I was looking for my ancestor who lived in Vermont. I looked in the catalog. I found a book that I thought might have some information about my ancestor. I went down to the section of the books in the library, physically walked downstairs to social sciences, went to the section that had books on Vermont and county histories and everything, and I found the book that I wanted, and then I went to the first Vermont book that they had because they were arranged by state. So the first book that was there for Vermont, and I pulled it off the shelf. And an hour or two later, I had pulled every single book off the shelf, and put them all back on. In other words, I'm not just pulling them off and piling them up, but I'm putting them back right exactly where I got them one at a time. And near the end of that whole process, I found a book that had all of the transcribed probate records for Vermont. Now, I wasn't looking for probate records in Vermont. I didn't even know probate records in Vermont would be in that section. In fact, it hadn't occurred to me to look at that, but because I was systematically going through the books on the shelves, I found the probate book. I opened it up, and there was the probate file for my great, 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 whatever it was, ancestor, David Shepard, who lived in Vermont. And this is something that I had never seen. I found that no one had ever looked at that reference, and we had nothing. And the key issue that we were trying to solve here was that just to locate him, actually prove that he lived in Vermont and that he was associated with the state, because we have this family tradition that he was fought in the Revolutionary War. Well, here's this reference to his probate file. Finds out he doesn't have two shillings to rub together. He's about as poor as they come. And that could also explain why we have difficulty in finding this person. But that was just through this process of doing the research, page by page, book by book, and looking to see what's there. It's called Walking the Shelves, as I mentioned earlier. And you can see that could be, a little bit of physical exercise there along with your intellectual pursuits as you do this. I When I was at the University of Utah Library on my breaks and in down times when I really wasn't working, or on lunch when I was doing my lunch or whatever, I didn't usually took 2 minutes to eat, and then I would go do what I needed to do. And what I did was I started in the upper corner at the top floor of the library and walked the shelves, the entire shelves. My goal was to go look at the books. At the time, they supposedly had like 1 million books, and so I wanted to go through and look at them. You have to know me to know why this happened. But I went to look at every book, and I did, and I ended up in the basement in the cataloging department, and I had virtually looked at every single shelf and every place in the entire library. So that was my exercise, was walking the shelves. Now, the interesting thing is that you will find the same subjects exactly in more than one location as you do this. So as you're going around the library, let's say you were looking for history of Grayson County, Texas. Now, you would think that would be simple enough. And guess what? You're going to find it in 5 different places in a large library. That would be conservative. You might find it even in more places. So you really can't assume that you've done your research until you have worked your way through a lot of subjects in a lot of different associations of words and catalog items. And then if you're actually there physically in the library, you want to look at things that you would never in your life have guessed could contain information about your ancestors, because you're there in the library. And secondly, there probably are a lot of things out there that you never even realized were related to your ancestors or had anything to do with them. And that's when you'll find the best and the most interesting information. Okay, one more caution again, make sure the library allows cameras or smartphones or other electronic devices, because if they don't, you're in trouble. And use your camera to take notes. Writing it out if you need to do that. If that's your way of doing research and everything. I'm not out there questioning what people do. I'm just saying that your time in the library is usually limited, and you don't want to spend the whole time writing down things that you can just take a picture of in 1 second. And by the way, you can take perfectly adequate pictures of microfilm, even with those old overhead microfilm projector booths, the old projector booths out there. They will, you just got to make sure it's in focus. It drives me crazy if I move the camera or whatever. And you may wish to, if they'll allow it, use some kind of bracing device or tripod. When you get into that, they'll probably say no. But what I have found, for instance, especially with microfilm, is that the case, the microfilm viewer itself, is a good enough place to brace yourself and brace the camera to get good pictures. So that's how we get pictures. Also, here's a good point, and that is, don't just take pictures of the page that appears. I get this all the time from people. In this last couple of weeks, somebody sent me a stack of photos of documents in books and in records from Rhode Island where we're doing some research, and didn't identify them. In other words, here it is. Here's the name of my ancestor, marriage record, or whatever, and I don't even have no clue which book's it in or where he found it, because he didn't give me the citation and he didn't give me a copy of the title page or the cover or the number or something that lets me get in and get the source citation information for the information that I've just obtained. Okay, so if you can, and or if it's encouraged, now like this library, for example, is an academic library, the Brigham Young University Family History Library. Since it's here on campus and there's students here, 30,000 or more or less students here, the rules concerning electronics are extremely liberal. I think every single student at the student university has either a laptop or a smartphone of some kind of device, an iPad or something to record information. So this is where you would want to transfer. And the simplest way to do those transfers, by the way, is to transfer them, like here where we have Wi-Fi connections, is to transfer them to an online storage, whether you use Dropbox or use Google Docs or use Google Drive or you use OneDrive from Microsoft, wherever it is. But if you use one of those, then you can just simply add all of these photos, documents, and notes that you take up directly online so that they're available to you. And that's what we're calling cloud services. So if you take the images that you have and you upload them, one of the first questions, okay, when we've said this and we've gone around and around, is about taking photos and using it for taking notes, is the question of copyright. Are you violating somebody's copyright? Well, the simple answer to that is yes, you are, as a matter of fact, by copying the item. But we have a doctrine. It's not a law. It's just what's called a doctrine of what's called fair use. And fair use for educational research purposes means that you can copy what you are interested in. Now, the question here is, what are you going to do with it? Now, if you're using it for your own purposes to extend your family line, that's usually not even an issue. But if you intend to publish it and recopy it and publish it, then it's where you've got a real problem. Or if you take the entire item, in other words, the entire book or whatever. And if you do that, make sure you have permission to do that from the person. Now, I've literally had people walk up to me and hand me an entire book of information about my family. It's amazing how that happens. But my first question is, do you have a copy of it? Is it online? No. Can I copy it? Well, yeah, of course. Who are you? Oh, I'm the guy who wrote it. Yeah, and I can tell you you can copy it. Okay, it's gone. I have never understood, by the way, why people who are writing books and things about genealogy think they shouldn't copy it. I thought that was why we were writing the books about genealogy, is to let people copy it. But anyway, that's kind of a strange topic here. Okay, now let's talk about archives. This is a program online. As part of a program that we haven't gotten to yet called the worldcat.org. Now, when we talk about looking for items online, we use the WorldCat, WRLDCAT, just like a cat, .org, WorldCat. And it has over 2 billion with a B, catalog entries, and in tens of thousands of libraries around the world. So this is kind of the go-to place to look for information in the libraries. Along with that, though, is even further, is more obscure than WorldCat, is Archive Grid. Archive Grid is the same country, organization. It's the OCLC, which is the acronym for the name of the WorldCat company. But the OCLC is also runs Archive Grid. And Archive Grid is a way to get into these many of the archives around the United States. So this is mainly United States. WorldCat is around the world, but Archive Grid is here in the United States. So it's not exhaustive, but it is one of the few places where you can go to get a listing of more than just kind of a superficial listing of what is sitting in the special collections libraries and archives around the country, who, by the way, do the same thing that the National Archives does and classify things by linear feet or whatever. And it's just like that collection that I talked about at Northern Arizona University. They tell me it's 6 feet. Well, I have to go through that. They don't even know what's in it because nobody's cataloged it. So they don't have indexes or copies or anything. So this is how you start to get into it with something like Archive Grid, which gives you at least a more expansive discussion about the items that are sitting in all these archives and where they are across the country. These archives are usually closed stacks, which means you're not going to be able to use my standard technique of reading the shelves. You're going to have to rely on making requests to the people for the items that you find as you find them. And that's where it's kind of like guessing what's in the black box. You're just going to have to get used to the idea of doing research and narrowing it down to where you know that they must have that information, and it's probably in this library. So need to, before you start traveling to or trying to access an archive, always verify the condition of use. Very, very, very importantly, the hours and any restrictions on making copies. So those are the things. You might also want to be aware that with the archives, you're going to have to, in a lot of cases, register as a researcher, or if you are an academic, that helps. But if you're not, you're going to have to show them something that indicates that you're a serious researcher, because I don't just let anybody walk in there and get into the libraries and archives. And that's what I said. Okay, so I'm anticipating my own little pop-up word things here on my presentation. Okay, and remember that they may not be allowed. They just might not let you do that, and you have to be provided. You have to then go to the next best thing, which is paper and pencil. And and some of these libraries will actually say you cannot take in pens. You have to take in just pencils, and they will specify it has to be a number 2 lead pencil, and no mechanical pencils are allowed. Believe me, I've heard that. That's part of what you would have to face going into an archive. Pens may not be allowed. And another thing is, a lot of them make money off of their copies, and it's a source of income for the archive. And you just have to bite the bullet and find out how much the copies are, and be prepared with whatever legal tender they're willing to take. Now, a lot of the archives today, what they will do is they'll have a copy machine that you can use, or they may have a copy machine if you have self-service. If they don't, they'll have a copy center where you'll have to go in and give them the items, tell them which pages you want. They'll copy it, and you'll come back in 15 minutes or an hour or 2 days or whatever, and they'll have their copies sitting there for you, but then you'll pay for the copies. So you need to know how much work you're going to do. When I used to do research years and years ago at the Family History Library in Salt Lake, and spend weeks on end there, I would bring my briefcase halfway full of rolls of quarters, because the copies were 25 cents, and so I would have to sit there and crank out copies. Okay, some simple rules here. Don't leave anything in the archive, even if you have to go run to the restroom or whatever. Don't leave your stuff unattended. You're liable even to, these are public places to some extent. They're not your home, and the things you leave there may disappear. Now, uh, serious researchers in the libraries will purchase security cables and for their briefcases and everything. And what I do is I have a long security cable that I lock into my computer, and then I wrap it around my briefcase, and then I wrap it around the table there in the library. And I figure out somebody takes out the table that they'll probably notice it. And so that's where I try to keep my stuff if I have to leave it for any time. Now, the final rule here is keep looking. And we're going to mention now, I'm going to put this last. I waited to put this last because this is the thing that usually is the least known item, and it's something that I want everybody kind of to focus on. And that is university special collections libraries. Every major library, every major university and college in the United States has a library. Every one of those libraries has a special collections department. If you live in some place like North Carolina, for example, they have like 50 or more. I don't know the total number, but it's just dozens and dozens of major educational institutions from UNC to Duke and all of these different big universities. And all of these people have massive special collections. Special collections are uncirculated items of value, manuscripts, uh, anything that's been donated to the library in that regard. And they are like black holes. They suck in this stuff. And you can find some of the most remarkable material in these special collections libraries for genealogical purposes. So, for example, if I had an ancestor who lived in a state like North Carolina, I would just make it a point to start trying to drill into and understand what each of the special collections libraries may have in the way of records. And you just never know. And the special collections library that we went to at NAU in the Klein Library there, the basically the information that we had was diaries, journals, and letters and other documents, official and otherwise, of the history of this whole town where my great grandfather lived, and information about him and his neighbors and everybody else. And so you just cannot underestimate. Another area is very important is local and state historical societies, and the difficulty you're going to find here is when they're open, when they actually will let you come in and look at their stuff. Most of them are only open on alternate Thursdays on months that begin with J or something like that. So you really have to know and talk to the people and get on the phone and talk to people. And then when you are there, it helps to see if you can find somebody else who's been in the library so that you can get what's really the case instead of what they tell you on the phone. And so just be careful in that regard. And local and state libraries, if they're your own state library and your own local library, then you probably have some repeated access, so you get used to what they will and won't do for you. Museums, by the way, do have large collections of documents, and some of the museums, especially commercial or non-profitly commercial museums, like Huntington Museum in California and the Newberry and some of these other private organizations, Jamestown in Virginia, they have huge museums and they have huge libraries and they have lots of information and documents that may be of value to you. Newspaper offices are always helpful. A lot of things going on with newspapers right now and digitizing newspapers, most of which are ending up in pay subscription websites, by the way. Never, never underestimate what the librarians may know and who they may know. At one point in time, I was in a place called Seligman, Arizona. If you know Route 66, then you know what Seligman is, but if you don't know Route 66, you probably never heard of it. And we were looking for a carving on a rock that my great-grandfather had done in the 1800s. And we didn't know physically where it was. We were looking to see if we could find it. We knew that it was there. We knew what it looked like because we had a photograph of it, but we didn't know idea where it was. And I went into the library. The little library turned out to be in a mobile home, mobile trailer, and they just had a flood, so there were big fans running. And I asked the librarian about it, and she said, "Well, no, I don't know that. But just a minute, I've got. I mean, you have a minute?" And she said, I'll call some people." So she got on the phone and started calling people in town that she knew, and to see if she could find somebody who knew where that rock was. Okay, never underestimate these people. I mean, librarians, their job is to help people, and they usually look at it very well. Well, thanks for watching. Appreciate you being here. This is another of the webinars from BYU Family History Library. Um, question. Okay, question came up before I go through the end stuff here. Are genealogists considered to be serious researchers? Uh, some places, by the way, I would not say the genealogist word. Most of the people who are in these libraries, and a lot of the larger libraries, if you tell them you're a genealogist, you get ushered out. They do not want to deal with you. And so if you're going to say you're a serious researcher, do not use the G word. Just tell them you're doing some research, historical research, and you would like to look at the records. Um, you really have to kind of get a guess. If they have a section on their website for genealogists, then they're probably acknowledging the fact that that's part of the people that want to come in. But in some cases, if you say you're a genealogist, you don't get any help at all. They just don't care. Nope, sorry, they don't consider us to be serious researchers most of the time. Um, this again, this has been a BYU Family History Library webinar, and all of these are recorded and uploaded to our BYU YouTube channel. We would encourage you to uh, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that would help you and us know what you need and what we need to do to help you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, James, for the wonderful webinar. And thank you for being with us today. If you didn't get a chance to answer our polls at the beginning of the webinar, please take some time to do so now. If you have any feedback, there is a spot you can let us know how we're doing, what we can do to improve, and that's always appreciated. Um, we would like to invite you to come back tomorrow and watch the webinar that we have going on tomorrow as well, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you.